Thanks again, Nick, for hopping on to the episode of Untapped Stories. I know we were just chatting a little bit before the show there, and so much good content and so much good background with your story. But maybe I love starting with this, for the parents and athletes who haven't seen your page before, haven't come across your website, don't know much about you. For them, if you could go all the way back to the early days of sports for you, just to kind of paint the picture. What did sports mean for you growing up? Was it always one sport, multi-sport? Were you kind of like a killer athlete, or did it take a lot to get to where you are? How did sports shape for you in the early days?
Well, Gene, I think that what do they say? Those that can't teach, I guess the same thing would be those that can't coach might be an apt way to describe how I got into this. So growing up in Portland, Oregon, I mean, I played all the sports everybody played. I played baseball, I played soccer, basketball probably was my love, but stopping just short of 6 feet. Being a fairly large guy, it was never probably going to take me into college, but I loved basketball. That was probably my passion. Okay. Growing up in the 90s in Portland, Oregon, Ooh. You had the Trailblazers competing, Clyde Drexler competing with Michael Jordan, so it was just, for me, it was a great time to play sport. So basketball was the love. And then inevitably played, probably fairly predictably, given how wide my shoulders are, American football once I got into high school. And I dabbled, and I do say dabbled, in rowing my first year at Oregon State. But wow. Where probably my love of sport came from is when I went to high school. It was a fairly newly built high school in the late 90s. And nowadays you expect that a high school is going to have gyms, right? It's going to have a weight room, top class in some cases. That wasn't necessarily the case, certainly not in Oregon. I mean, we weren't talking about Texas football here back in the mid to late 90s. And so we had a gym and we had a strength coach. He worked at Costco during the day. He loved, I don't know if he had any credentials. He probably didn't, but he loved strength training himself. Okay. And so he did the early shift at Costco. And every day at 2:30, Rudy was his name, originally from Hawaii. Rudy would open the gym. And Rudy is just this, 5'6", 5'7", stocky, well-built, shaved head, just ball of joy. And I remember when I met him at 15, and he's like, you come here every day, you put in the work, and I'll put the work into you. And, the program was up on the board, and it was simple, Gene. It was nothing crazy. And so I started strength training, obviously, because it would help with football, all throughout the year, all throughout the summer. Never really missed a day. And at the time, I'm sitting here thinking, wow, this guy is great to be around. He's making me a really good athlete. But what I didn't realize is how many life lessons Rudy was passing through his coaching, kind of like a Trojan horse. You think you're getting one thing, but the real meaning is underneath. And while I was in high school, I was a kid. For me, I was overweight in that I wasn't happy with my body. And as I was starting to physically mature playing football, I just took it upon myself, and supported by my grandfather, to get an extra gym membership and a nutrition coach. And over about an 8-month period, I lost around 50 pounds of wow. Probably the baby fat I had accumulated to that point. But at 15, now just turned 16, going into my junior year in high school, I left my sophomore year not confident in myself, not physically looking the way on the outside I felt on the inside. And when I walked into school that junior year, I was a completely different person, to the point where I wasn't recognized by a lot of individuals because most of the change occurred over the summer. Wow. And so Rudy was there for all of that, as well as other individuals who helped me on that journey, as well as being an athlete. And like so many, I said, that's what I want to do. I want my job to be helping people achieve the best version of themselves. And it also just so happened to be through a mechanism that changed me, that I fell in love with. So there was the joy in the craft, enjoying what the craft gave and passed on to others. And so that really was my education in sport and sport performance. But the funny thing is, Gene, wasn't a great athlete, even though I can demonstrate exercise with the best of them, but I wasn't a great athlete. I wasn't sport crazy, even though I enjoy sport. I wouldn't be watching ESPN all hours of the night. But I love the human condition. I love the human experience, the journey, and the body as a vehicle to get the most out of ourselves.
Well, see, man, that's why I love these conversations. There's so many good tidbits to pull out of that. But I've heard over the years so many powerful stories like that. Guys, girls, you obviously wouldn't have heard of, like the coach already working with you. But people that have poured their love into kids and helped them find the passion and find their way in life. I think that's truly what coaching is all about. Skills and drills, you can find that. It's helpful. You can get better on the court, on the field. But if you can find somebody who instills a passion for something, whether it's like strength and speed or whether it's taking that into business or life, I think that's what the power of a true coach is at a young age. And it's always that sweet spot, seems similar for you. Middle school, early high school, kids are starting to figure it out. They need that mentor. It's a really pivotal point in life. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I guess for someone like a Rudy, and obviously a lot of what you do now too, if you could take a kid who's maybe 13, 14, 15, around that sweet spot of an age, what types of strength, speed, fitness, body workouts would you want them doing nowadays, knowing all the the science, the data you've accumulated? Like, how, if a parent and athlete's hearing this and they're passionate, they're like, I want to start just like Nick did when I was going into high school, what would you have a kid start with, and what would days 1, 2, and 3 look like if you're working out with someone?
I think for me, the greatest gift you can really give anybody, insofar as what we're talking about, is the capacity to learn. Help giving them, as I like to say, the first principle, fundamental tools that are the gifts that keep on giving. And so when it comes to movement learning, and we'll keep it very general because I know you might have sport coach, strength coach, other sorts of individuals listening. If we think of whatever the movement craft that is the world you work in or that your child works in, for me, very early on, I can't change what I do not understand. And so the ability to have a young athlete, first and foremost, learn to understand their body and how their body moves, not in kind of an intellectual way that even you can describe with words, but more in a perceived, felt sense of what good movement feels like versus what poor movement feels like. Because once I'm able to make that distinction, we oftentimes call it, the technical term is our kinesthetic awareness. People will throw fancy words like proprioception around, but basically it's just that body awareness, the ability to understand where my body is in space and whether or not I'm engaging my body in the most efficient way I can in terms of the task I'm performing. And so this is why, my youngest is 11, and all the stuff we do is body weight. He plays soccer. We live in Ireland, so we call it football here. He's clever enough when he's in America with the grandparents, it's soccer. When he's here, it's football. And with him, all of our activity is just body weight. It's just fun. And for me, with my strength coach hat on, we nearly do everything with a soccer ball, with a football, but we try to do all sorts of different tasks, different skills, make him move all over the place. And at the end of the day, he's the one driving it. But because I'm out there doing it with him, I can kind of guide us to be doing different things. But ultimately, with young individuals, I find their curiosity, their excitement will lead you on the path if you're able to look and listen and pay attention to your child. And once they start to show that interest, then engage with the curiosity and the interest. And so to answer your question specifically, I would start with your classic body weight, calisthenic work. Can I squat? Can I lunge? Can I hinge? And to be honest with a lot of kids, they want to learn that first and foremost through physical play.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to start by teaching my son who plays football how to move in the weight room. I want to teach him a lot of these skills, like jumping is a header, right? A lateral lunge is change of direction, right? A squat is a header, or it's a defensive position when you're keeping somebody out of the box. You see what I'm saying? All of those movement patterns are first and foremost available in the context of the sport that I am teaching, naturally, and certainly in a way, if you have a good coach who knows what they're doing. Inevitably, I know my son tells me that once he's a bit older, he wants to work out with dad when he's 15. And then, okay, we can get someone into a gym, and we can use a barbell, and you can use a dumbbell to engage in the exact same kind of clean patterns, but with a little bit of load. And what is load? Load at the end of the day for a young person is feedback. Imagine right now someone is listening to you and I, and they didn't quite hear something correctly. What are they going to do? They might rewind the podcast, but they're going to turn the volume up, because the volume enriches the signal, enriches the clarity. That's what load is meant to do early on when it comes for an athlete. It's not necessarily to make them bigger, faster, stronger, even though it will do that as a byproduct of development anyway. But early on, the load is like turning the volume up. It just brings a little bit more stimulus, a bit more clarity, a bit more of something to work with, work on, or work around based on whatever the skill is. And then once that movement skill is there, and let's say they're now 15, 16, well, then we're in a really good position to start to add load to the body through a barbell, through a dumbbell, through additional reps and volume, additional work on the field. If I had someone that was 15, if I think of my son right now, I'd probably have him start out training twice a week in the gym, doing two total body sessions, and one additional, let's say, movement skill type session, or rather 2 gym sessions and just making sure there's a good 15-minute movement skill type bolt on to any of the training or practice that he might already be engaged with. Our goal would inevitably to get to 3 to 4, let's say, training stimuli above and beyond the sport. And then when it was more in season, probably 2 or 3, and just working through good fundamentals all the way throughout. The brilliant thing is with good coaching, good movement, and a very simple plan that is consistently executed and progressed in the right way, at the right level, at the right speed, athletes are going to get better. This stuff really isn't rocket science. The information age is overloaded our circuits, has turned the volume up too loud, and first principles are first principles. Until AI makes its way into our motor neurons, we still have to go with the old pound the rock fundamentals.
I'm on board with that. And I was trying to think about it maybe a little bit selfishly, but I'm sure some parents and athletes out there in a similar boat. So I have 2 kids and a third coming, but 2 boys right now, a 3-year-old and a 20-month-old, super active. They love just playing around. I talked to a couple other coaches, and I'm curious to get your thoughts. So I'm being a former athlete myself, I would not just stick them in the gym, obviously, at 4 or 5 or 6. I think it's too early. But to engage in that type of play that you're talking about, is there a good, healthy way to go about it? Now, like I've heard some coaches say, hey, throw the kid in gymnastics or jujitsu or like a parkour class. Like, I'm all for free play too, but if you want to give a little bit of an extra juice to really young kids, they're ideas or different types of like play, structured play activities they can do nowadays. Yeah,
I think multi-sport, but multi-activity exposure is absolutely paramount. I think anything of the physical calisthenic nature, whether it's parkour, whether it's gymnastics, whether it's dance, I think these are, for every child, paramount. If we think back from an evolutionary perspective, dance and wrestling and just general animalistic type play, which very much so is mirrored in dance, in gymnastics, in the spirit of parkour or some of these various other type movement communities. I think these things are essential. And they're the things that a child, even as young as your own, will do quite naturally. And so both of my kiddos engaged in those type of things. Many people fall out of love with that. It reaches a level where the play starts to transition into performance, and everyone will have their natural exit. Some people take it all the way, but obviously they're the rare few. I think then once a lot of that physical groundwork is being built, getting kids, I think soccer is a really, really important place for a lot of people. It teaches locomotor ability, so running, change of direction. It teaches incredible, obviously, coordination in terms of movement with a ball. And so obviously that's focusing more on the lower body. I think when we look at sports, whether it's baseball, tennis, or basketball, same exact idea, but now it brings that fine motor coordination to the upper body, right? So if you think of it like that, am I building a physical curriculum? Am I developing ability to move and have good control of my lower body, to move and have good control of my upper body? Team sports then develop another layer, right? They develop community. They develop interpersonal communication skills. They probably address feelings of fairness more quickly. They also require higher levels of visual and spatial dynamics. So think about someone who inevitably wants to go into graphic design, right? I'm thinking about this actually on the fly, but that ability to be very early on exposed to pattern recognition, understanding how things work and how to respond, right? Yep. Someone who plays, let's say, tennis or golf isn't going to have to respond to so many other variables. They have a different set of constraints. So just thinking out loud, if I kind of reverse engineer this, you have this really nice thing where, can I get a bit of exposure to physical body work? Can I get a bit of exposure to team sport? Can I get a bit of exposure to working with my upper body, my lower body? And obviously things like tennis and golf, like playing the piano or an instrument, are more individual areas of interest. That's fine as well. And then by the time the child is, I'd say between 9 and 10, you start to get a sense of what they really love. And for me, you support that. For me, with my children, I said, I always want you to do one physical activity. I don't mind what it is. If you commit for the season. You don't back out. So you commit for the season. If you want to do more than one sport, that's fine. Or if you want to do some other activity, doesn't have to be sport, that's fine. But you have to do something for your physical literacy. I didn't use that term with them, but to use your body. So that's, I don't know, that's my belief. And I don't think that would be far off what a lot of the, so to speak, developmental experts in the space would agree with. You're just trying to teach them as many movement languages as possible.
Yeah, that's funny, man, because the exposure word keeps coming back to me. I think that's what it's really all about. Until a kid starts to love one or a few sports, and then in America at least, you stick them in the baseballs, the footballs, the basketballs. Exactly. But at least they have that base. We had a world-renowned basketball shooting coach on the other day. Goes all over literally the world and teaches the art of shooting. He said he'd much rather work with a kid who's never touched a basketball but has done jiu-jitsu, gymnastics, because they just come in with a good base, versus a kid who's only played basketball and isn't that athletic but has kind of learned to shoot. If you have that base, it goes so far throughout your athletic career, and you can pick up other sports, and I think just pivot to whatever you want to do because you have that from the 5, 6, 7 age. Can
I comment on that for a second? Because there's a reason why. Right? People are like, well, why multi-sport? There's actually a reason why. And think of it like this. If I was to take a baby day one and you watch that baby move, right? It's completely unrefined, but there is incredible potential. But if you notice, when the baby comes into the world, they have an incredible access to what is referred to as degrees of freedom. So literally, the degrees of freedom, they can move through their hip, their knee, their ankle, their spine, their shoulder, right? They're so wibbly wobbly, though, that they cannot control those degrees of freedom. But there reaches an age, which kind of roughly relates to the strength to height weight ratio, where a kid starts to develop the capacity to control their body. But to stand up and walk, actually, what do I have to do? I have to reduce the degrees of freedom. I have to stiffen at my hip, my knee, and my ankle, and my spine so I can stand. And I have to keep it very stable as I walk. Anyone listening, imagine if they've ever hurt their back. The second someone has hurt their back, what do? You shut down your degrees of freedom. As someone gets older, what happens, especially well into your, let's say, 70s, 80s, and 90s, your degrees of freedom go well down. Then you're at an increased risk of falling. Why? You're at an increased risk of falling because you can't as quickly and nimbly move through, let's say, in this case, your hip, to actually put your foot in front of you. So why am I saying that? Well, when you put athletes, especially in the dance, the martial arts, the calisthenics, the parkour, the gymnastics, those more than any other sport teach you to explore, control, and challenge, oftentimes in very odd positions, your full menu of movement capacity, degrees of freedom. When you play specific sports, you use a very specific set of degrees of freedom. So the more activities you expose your child to, the more degrees of freedom they learn to trust and control. Because if intuitively your body doesn't trust the degree, it does not release, it freezes it. And so there's a real motor reason why athletes who have a diversity of background tend to seem to be just magically gifted at everything. There's no magic to it. Their education in their body is just far reaching. They have a PhD in how to move their body by the time they're 12, whereas someone who hasn't had as many sporting activities is only a first year.
I can't wait to share that clip. I can't tell you how many times I've had the conversation of multi-sport athletes, and I've heard a lot of really good answers. I think that summarizes it perfectly. It's the degrees of freedom, and it's no mistake that when you hear about an athlete who, like in the U.S., I just watched the College Baseball World Series a couple of weeks ago. There was a kid who was a phenomenal high school football quarterback, could have played D1 quarterback anywhere he wanted, became a pitcher at Oklahoma. And I'm thinking to myself, how can a kid be that dynamic to be like top D1 at both? You look at his framework, you look at the way he's built, and just like how he moves on the field. It's obvious he has things that other athletes don't, and it's probably from growing up being exposed to all those different sports, doing multiple things. So that it makes a ton of sense when you explain it like that. Honestly, I hope a lot of parents and athletes hear that, because I've heard some people are still on the side of one sport. I've been a multi-sport proponent for a long time. I think a lot of kids would be better off for it. But I do want to ask, maybe switching to one more of a coaching type of question. So I've been in the weight room with a lot of coaches as basketball players, not as much as like football and rugby's, but are there some, like, habits is the word I'm going to use, but habits or teachings or even just kind of like myths around coaching where a lot of strength trainers teach one thing, but you would either debunk it or say that's not the right way to do it, and you have to come in and correct a lot of athletes when they start working with you?
I mean, Gene, for me, my bias, my career has always had me in front of professional athletes. And it's not that professional athletes don't come with echoes of challenge from prior years of training. They certainly do. But as you said there, by the time someone is going to pay you to play a sport, you're dealing with the 1% of the 1%. So they oftentimes are master manipulators of their own body and their capacity to adapt and overcome, sometimes despite limitations. So with that being said, I do know plenty of strength and conditioning coaches, especially in the college ranks, that would have a lot of various views on how they might try to answer your question. I think the way I'm going to approach it is just slightly different. One of my former colleagues, a great strength coach, track coach called a guy named Deriletto, he once said to me when I was first interning at a place called Athletes Performance in Phoenix, Arizona, he said, the best program is the one you have not adapted to yet. And I think that's the reality, And the other quote that was oftentimes paraded by a good friend and former boss / mentor, Mark Verstegen, was, I'm going to butcher the quote, but I want to be led by systems rather than methods, right? So for methods, there are many. So if I'm talking about the oftentimes the argument of, should I do Olympic lifting? Should I do powerlifting? Should I squat? Can I ever do bilateral movement, or should it always be unilateral, right? There's all of these various micro arguments that go on. I'm sure they happen across industries, but they flourish in strength and conditioning, partly because there are so many ways to get the same thing done. And so for me, when I am programming for a group of individuals, do I have my preferences? Of course I do. But are any of my preferences hills that I'm willing to die on if I see that it's not working for somebody? No. Because in my mind, the best method is plural. It's my ability to find the right method for you. And so I need to start somewhere, but then I need to be able to iterate and adapt as we go. But for things like, if I have a very short window of time, 8 weeks, let's say, and you're coming into me and I want to develop vertical power, and you've never done an Olympic lift before, and I'm time poor, am I going to spend a significant portion of my time teaching you an Olympic lift, knowing that it probably will take me a number of days or possibly weeks before I can get you good enough to get enough weight on that bar to actually get meaningful adaptation, when I know there are other forms of developing vertical power? I'll just take a pragmatic approach. That is in no way speaking to my view on Olympic lifting, but looking at it through the constraints, the context, the time, and the individual to make the decision. And so at the end of the day, I think coaches need to be unbelievable chameleons, as another mentor once told me, not only in how they deal with varying personalities, but how they can adapt the program to meet the needs of individuals. At the end of the day, there really are no silver bullets. The vast majority of well-structured programs work for the vast majority of people, and that's the simple truth.
I think that goes across not just strength and speed, but all sports. I mean, we have 16 sports on our platform, and I think some of the best coaches I've seen, they can work with an athlete who's 7, an athlete who's playing in college, an athlete who's pro, coming home. Like, you have to be able to adapt. It can't just be a one-shot system for everybody. I do want to ask, though, based on what you said kind of at the beginning of your take there, you work with a lot of 1% athletes, and I think a lot of parents and athletes want to be in that 1%, but even among those 1%, when you get to the best of the best, are there any, not physical, but mental, even emotional, spiritual, whatever, differences that separate, within the 1%, the really good from the really great? Like when you see a new player come in, or you're working out with the guy or girl for the first time, and it's day 1 or day 2, and you just know that they're going to have the long-term potential. Like what do you see in those athletes, and what can young athletes work up to build themselves towards to be like that in terms of attitude, emotion, whatever it might be?
I think you have 2 categories of good, and you have 1 category of great. Okay? So the 2 categories of good go something like this. You'll meet an individual who is mentally impressive. Their ability to deal with challenge, change is profound. Their story is oftentimes marked by hurdle and setback, yet here they are having arrived at the finish line. And oftentimes the reason it's been hurdle and setback is because their body was good enough, but not great. And so they needed the mind to get to the ceiling. Because if they didn't reach their physical ceiling, they were never going to make it, right? So this is what we might call the mind over body people. The second category, it's inversed. You have an individual who came into this world and by genetics and circumstances has an incredibly high ceiling. And so for them, a default state has always resulted in success. And the downside of that is they've really never been tested mentally, right? But inevitably they will be tested mentally. So when that person arrives professionally, they're the one oftentimes their biggest growth opportunity is in their mind, because they most certainly are in a room now where everyone else is at their same level. So when you meet a professional where the first time they've really dealt with challenge, you see it all the time in the NFL, all the time in the NFL with rookies, right? For a lot of them, that's the first time they're not the big dog, okay? Yeah. And it's sink or swim time because, as they say, it's a next man up league and there are thousands at the door knocking. So we have mind over body, where mind is their super strength, and that's allowed them to get the most out of the body, and other people body over mind. The greats have it both ways. They had an incredibly high ceiling, and despite that, they chose to challenge. They chose to push themselves. And even if circumstances didn't create difficulties, they made difficulties of their own just to keep pushing.
I like that.
And so that's how I view it.
And going on that too, because I couldn't agree more. When you're an athlete coming up, how do you create those difficult circumstances for yourself? Is it, say, if I'm taking a kid who's maybe in a small town, USA, not a lot of talent around them, they're the one athlete, super talented, beating everybody where they are. They don't have the option to go play on an AAU team or get like the really good, competition within where they live. So how do you at home or in workouts that you're doing or in training, how do you create those obstacles to overcome them if external circumstances can't give them to you?
Yeah. There's a lot of researchers actually in my part of the world, in Ireland and the UK, that study this. They kind of refer to it as the rocky road. The natural follow-on question when people read their research that like the best athletes who really have repeated success, not one-time success, but repeated success, are the ones that have had all these challenges. And so they're resilient, they're adaptable. So then people naturally ask, well, how do we fabricate these challenges? I'll be honest with you, Gene. I totally understand the motivation of the question, but I struggle to give it an answer that I myself believe. Because there's something about legitimate challenge that life serves up that I don't think fabricating can really come near. Now, obviously, this is why I think the training room and the track and the stadium stairs and the field are a brilliant crucible to ask questions of yourself. And so I don't think 5 a.m. running stairs is going to replace the resilience required when you get cut from your first team, but I think it will prepare you to deal with that blow far better than someone that doesn't. And so I'm saying this a bit tongue-in-cheek and metaphorically, but the ability to push my body to the depths where it wants to say stop, and I say no, within reason here, I think it's in all of those moments that we learn to meet resistance, to meet failure, to meet challenge as an invitation to say there's more here.
I think, and that's so true, man, from a parent standpoint, thinking about myself with 2 boys and other parents that I know have older kids, I think parents can have a big role in that as well. Not that you want to push your kid too far. You don't want to have them lose the love for sport or go overboard, but you can put them in, I guess, predictable but challenging situations.
Yes.
I know there was a quote from Deion Sanders with his son, and he was, I think they were in a private school, easy life from what the quarterback was saying, and then they switched to an inner city public high school where it was like a completely different world, not the same group of kids he was around. Football, sports, school was a lot more difficult to deal with, but Shador was like going through that, having made the switch, I felt like I was kind of thrown into the fire and I had to come out of it. So again, parents, not that you have to do that drastic of a change, but parents can have maybe little tweaks or little ways to challenge your kids when they're young that will, I think, benefit them over the long run. I think the gold paved road is just at some point you're going to get, smacked in the face. And as a parent, I'd rather see it be in a predictable environment that I'm creating than when the kid's 17, 18, kind of on their own.
Yeah, 100%. And related to this topic, Gene, is the fact that there is a very high relationship between people that choke under pressure versus people that don't, and that there's a perception as pressure as challenge versus pressure as opportunity. And those that consistently see pressure or external circumstances that risk something you value, in the case of sport, winning, pride, when you view that as an opportunity to be attacked, to be relished, versus a challenge to be feared, that as a strong predictor of performance under such conditions, under such pressure. So I think, to your point, more and more paths are becoming golden, to use your metaphor. Life with all of its challenges is becoming easier than it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yep.
So, and we're not going to sit here and artificially create conditions to put our children at risk, and no one would endorse that.
Yeah.
But what we can endorse is the mindset that your child brings to all of the bumps and bruises and challenges they do come into face with, and seeing those as opportunity, seeing that thing they feel in their stomach, not immediately as anxiety, but call it excitement, call it getting ready to go. Language, as we probably will get into, for me is a very powerful tool. And I think parents are responsible for, first and foremost, noticing their own language. Take a parent that by chance or choice is a glass half full individual who has a young person going into sport. And let's say they are a person, when they look at a situation, will immediately, they might see the positives, but they will verbalize the negatives. They'll verbalize the risk. Maybe they work in insurance, Gene, I don't know. But these people live on a continuum. So being serious, if I'm a parent and I know I don't mean you're a negative person, but you have a negative orientation to how you verbally interact with the world around you. That is something that if I'm a parent listening to this, I would be aware of. And I'm not telling that person to change as a person, but understand you will offer that same perspective to an athlete.
Yeah.
And an athlete with a negative mind is uniquely corrosive to progress. Because if they always see the thing through, I can't, self-doubt, it won't, this isn't going to work, that isn't going to work, then what it does is it blinds them from all the doors that are open, all the paths that are available, all the hills that if they just went a little bit farther, they would be able to summit and get across.
I like that. And vocabulary, I think, as a parent, is one of the most important things. No matter sports, school aside, you have to speak positively and instill confidence in your kids. Not overinflation, but if they fall, get back up. Sort of, we have a rule in our house. If our kids get hurt, as long as there's no blood or anything, we just clap and say, yeah, you're all good, get back. And you see the smile immediately instead of crying in tears. But on that training topic with vocabulary, is there, in the weight room, when you're on the field or doing the 5 a.m. steps, is there certain types of words, not that you would ban, but from a strength and speed coach standpoint, certain types of words you don't want to use? Is there an unspoken language that would help a lot of strength and speed coaches succeed, or types of coaches athletes should look out for that speak positively? How do you get that across?
I think oftentimes when people hear things like positive psychology and let's say positive, like, oh, so just everything's positive, we're just trying to make everybody feel good, everybody gets a trophy. Like, I think there's an energy that we are talking about positivity purely from the standpoint of we want them to have a positive emotional state, which is another way of saying we want them to feel good. We want them to not feel tension. We want them to not feel any negativity or discomfort. I want to actually debunk that. That's not the main reason to be positive. It's a side effect. Yes, when I'm positive with you, when I have charisma, when I'm encouraging, when I'm using it, yes, you can language, there's no doubt. That psychologically feels great. Dopamine, fantastic. But there's actually a very practical reason. When I tell you not to do something, Gene, or I tell you you've done something wrong, and let me be very clear, there is a time and a place to do that, 100%. But when I do that, I have given you one of many, many things that could go wrong. And so let me tell you a story. My friend calls this the sippy cup principle. He was dealing with his son, and his son had a sippy cup. And his son was pouring the sippy cup out. He said, don't pour the sippy cup out. Then he started to bang it. Don't bang the sippy cup. Then he started to shake it. Don't shake the sippy cup. And on and on and on. Because every time he told him not to do something, there was a whole host of other things that child could do that also would be the wrong thing. So what he then did is he said, let's say his name was Gene. Gene, when you're done with the cup, put it on the counter. And said, okay. And he put it on the counter. Boom. And that was the solution. So what could have been achieved in one statement, it took 5 or 6 preceding it. Now, that's a bit of an exaggerated example. Clearly, we're not dealing with toddlers and sippy cups, but it still demonstrates the point. When I give you the positive encouragement of what to do, of what to focus on, of where to place your energy, of what mindset to adopt, that's one thing that will lead you on the path to success. And it feels like a gift because you now have a tool to build your path that you did not have before. But when I tell you not to do something, I have psychologically taken something away because for a brief moment you feel there's a bit of ego damage.
Yep.
Then equally, I have not provided any mechanism in which to solve it. So you actually get scarred twice. Not only is it a negative, I still am finding myself not with a solution. And so from a coaching perspective, if I'm going to describe what not to do or what didn't go right, but I might need to do that to elevate your awareness and your clarity, no problem. But I always need to follow that what not to do with a what to do, and here's how. And that tends to be perceived as what we call positive. And so in my mind, I usually refer to as, are you a positive forward-oriented coach? Or are you kind of a negative backward-oriented coach? Are you pulling them back into the awareness of their issues, or are you pushing them forward into their solutions? Both have a place, but I think the positive orientation does a lot more than just make people feel good. It actually helps them progress. To your question, yes, there is what I refer to as a language of coaching. If I ask people listening, I want you to think of putting yourself, whether you're watching your child or you're a coach, put yourself in your context. Maybe you're on the court, on a field, in a gym, whatever. But the whistle to whistle, right? We're in the session where the crucible of coaching takes place. Now, when I'm in front of an athlete, there are 2 broad forms of communication going on, okay? There's my interpersonal communication with you. That's where I'm dealing with the person inside of the player, if you will. And then there is the movement communication. And here I'm now dealing with the player. I'm dealing with the task, the skill, and the goal. I think it's really, really important to draw those out for clarity because they coexist while one is coaching. But if we think about them separately. So now I'm going to take your question. Your question for me, I'm going to answer through the lens of movement communication, where now I am trying to get to what I like to refer to as the words that work. How do I offer a coaching cue or instruction or feedback to you whereby you can take those words, understand what they mean, and be able to convert that meaning, cash that meaning in as better movement. That is what we are doing here. And so when we look at that, Our coaching language lives on a continuum where, let's take a very simple example, something everyone can relate to, sprinting. I can zoom all the way in and give you a cue around what one muscle or one joint is doing. So I might say, flex your hip more, or extend your hip more, or keep your toes up when you're running, or run on the balls of your feet, right? A favorite one of soccer coaches. And we refer to this type of language as narrow, because it's narrow, it's very zoomed in, internal cues. They're internal because they're about the body, inside the body, internal. I could then say something to you, I could zoom out and say, hey, I want you to extend your leg, or rapidly extend your leg. Now we're broadening the lens. We're combining hip, knee, and ankle into a limb, so it's a broader cue. I can then zoom out further. I can say, I want you to focus on driving your leg hard into the ground. And I refer to this as hybrid. It's hybrid because I'm referencing the leg, that's internal, but I am anchoring it to the environment, in this case, the ground, which is external. I then can say, I want you to focus on rapidly pushing the ground away. So now I've deleted any reference to the body. It's now implied. And I've put 100% of your focus on pushing the ground away. I've used an excitable verb, right? Rapidly push the ground away. And we refer to this as a close external cue. It's close because I'm targeting the ground, and it's external because it's something outside of me. I could then take it a step further. Let's say I'm running 10 yards. And I could say, I want you to explosively bound towards that 10-yard line. So now it's still external, it's outside of my body, but because that 10 yards is a bit farther away, it'd be like a tennis player focusing on where they want to place the ball, or a golfer focusing on where they want to place the ball, or a basketball player focusing on a certain aspect of the rim. Yeah? We refer to those as far external cues. But now I can take it one step further. I could say, imagine a rattlesnake is right behind you. Beat the bite. Beat the bite. So now what I've done is I've given you an external cue, because I'm not making explicit reference to head, shoulders, knees, and toes, but I'm using an analogy. I'm saying use something you're familiar with, i.e. the fear of snakes and the speed at which they move, with something you're less familiar with, how to rapidly drive forward from a static start to run 10 yards as fast as you can. And so when we take that continuum of internal to hybrid to external to analogy, that represents, Gene, well over 90%, if not 100%, of the type of language we offer athletes, whether they're in the gym or on the field, to help teach them how to move, right?
I like that.
And so let me ask you this. If you were to take 100 movements, and for each of those movements, you were to give an example of an internal cue, like extend your hip, an external cue, like push the ground away, or an analogy like load and explode like a spring, if we're talking like a vertical jump. If we were to take 100 movements, we gave each type of those cues, and we were to give that, let's say, to 115-year-olds, do you think that they would predictably choose A, B, or C more often?
C, for sure.
Okay. So, and I've done unpublished work on that, and that's exactly right. Without hesitation, we know that people tend to prefer visual imagery that conveys movement. Second to that is these external cues, things that really relate to the physical world I'm dealing with. Push the ground, right? Drive the dumbbells towards the ceiling, right? Explode to the box, explode off the stair, cut the player in half if we're talking about tackling, so on and so forth. So what we find, though, is the vast majority of coaching language, Gene, guess what? Falls into the A category. The vast majority of actually how we teach movement is focusing on the parts. versus the whole. Now, the reason we do that is because we naturally feel almost with academic certainty that you need to understand the details of the movement before you can put it all together. And don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for that.
Yeah.
And so to go back to your question, no, I wouldn't delete any language from someone's coaching armory. But I would say our world of sport and sports performance needs a massive overhaul in how we organize the deployment of language and what language we offer in the moments before the athlete moves. So if I'm going to give you a lot of internal language describing the sprint, hey, I need your chest up. I need good extension to the hip, knee, and the ankle. I need opposite arm, opposite leg. I want your rear leg to drive forward to explode off the line. That's a lot of information.
Yeah.
That's like me asking you to hold 20 pieces of fruit simultaneously. Inevitably, you're going to drop them all at the grocery store unless you put them in the bag. Well, guess what the bag is? The bag is the external cue that says, now to do all of that, ... pause, moment of silence, build tension, push the ground away. And so if coaches would just take the moment before the movement to introduce the conductor that is the conductor of the symphony of joints and muscles and all the other bits of detail that they described, and like a Trojan horse, hide the detail in a simple, visual, offered verbal prompt that it is easy, nearly unavoidable for the athlete to digest, to the point where the second they hear the cue, they feel the physical consequence of doing it already in their body before they've even done the movement. And we call that the aha.
I've heard so many strength and speed coaches, so many sports coaches too, go both ways with that. Obviously, the latter makes a lot of sense to me. And for me, for parents and athletes and coaches too, probably in my own mind, it's coming out like this. It's also just making it fun in that respect.
Yes.
Like you're not being so scientific. Obviously, as the coach and where you've gotten to, you know the data, you know the science. And it's like a teacher too, right? If you're just coming into a class and going high level with the entire thing and pouring deep into the textbook on day 1, 2, and 3 for your students, like they're not going to grasp it. But if you relate it back to what they can understand, make it engaging, make it fun. Like the snake to me, as you were saying that, I wanted to go out in the field and start doing that drill. But when you were going through the body and the shoulder and the knee and the hip, I'm like, I can grasp it, but like, where's that going? So I think for that, our primary demographic for athletes ages 8, maybe all the way to high school, just make it fun, make them want to do it. They'll remember those drills too. Like they'll want to come back and do that, get away from the snake the next time. It's probably in their mind once and out of their mind forever if you talk about, using your hip to connect to your knee to drive up. It's just the same thing, but a whole different way to approach it. And I love that.
Well, 100%. And, for those listening, so we have a bunch of different kinds, especially for kids. I'd offer the following types of analogies. So the first one is animal-based analogies. So take an animal movement that somehow, so for example, a bunny or a frog for jumping, right? Animal-based analogies. We then have what I call superhero-based analogies, right? Comparing the specific features and movements. When we want someone to land and really stick it, we might say Hulk smash, right? Just fun little things that grab essence. In the past, kids played Call of Duty. Now they play Fortnite. So as a coach, my son plays a bit of Fortnite. So I know all the Fortnite vernacular. So I'm weaving that into, or other video games or other kind of pop culture references that are interesting. Then we have what I refer to as object-based analogies. Be like a spring, take off like a jet, right? Pop like a balloon. And so anytime you say kind of like or as if, you're about to introduce an analogy. And so all of these basically are comparisons between something the athlete is familiar with, is interested in, applied to their movement. It's fun, it's interesting, it's memorable. And as I like to say, if you get a laugh, if they're laughing, they're listening.
Yeah, I like that. And I couldn't agree with it more, just knowing, again, how my own kids are, kids that I've trained. if you just make it engaging and you make it fun, they will come back. And I think it's probably the same principle for you. I've heard it for sports coaches forever, but if you make the kid want to come back for next season or for the next session, you've done your job and you've kind of hooked them in a good way. But if it's not fun and it's not engaging, the kid's not going to want to do it. So again, couldn't agree with that more. Maybe my last question here, Nick, and this has been awesome, man. I get so many good tidbits, so much good feedback for parents and athletes. This one's a little more generic. Maybe to summarize everything you've talked about. I know you're mostly deal with pro athletes now, but you have your own kids, and I'm sure coming up in the States and in Ireland, you work with a lot of young kids too. But if you could speak to a room full of hundreds of thousands of young athletes, you have a couple minutes to talk to them. What are some really key, probably the most high-level key important points you'd want to get across to them, having learned everything you've gone through your entire coaching journey? Like, what's just not a pump-up speech in a way, but was it the importance of strength and speed? Is it technique? Is it mindset going into your sport? Like, what would you want to focus on with a group of young athletes if you had that opportunity?
Gene, I've been asked this question in many, many different ways. And the line that keeps coming back to me anytime I hear a question like this, whether it's referencing kids in this case or coaches, is keep going. Just keep going. And especially when things get tough, let your sense of difficulty be the rally cry at the finish line. When things get hard, see that as now I've started. Now I'm at the start line. This is an invitation to stop. This is an invitation to give up, or it's an invitation to keep going, because what's on the other side is better than what's on this side.
Wow.
And when it comes to sport, when it comes to physical work, all the way into when these youngsters turn into the parents and coaches listening to the podcast, the physical use of one's body is the single, in my opinion, best and most predictable way to ensure that what you give comes back to you in multiples. You will never go to a gym and give it your all and not walk out of that gym better than when you came in. It's true in gym, it's true in sport, but it's not always true in life. There's a lot of areas where one can be disappointed in life and you have no control. When it comes to using your body as the gift that it is, whether it's for sport or life, it is the one area where you can predictably know that what you dependably put in, you will get back. It's just a question of how bad you want it. And so for me, I just say, keep going.
And now I'm ready to run through a brick wall. That's the pump-up speech I needed for today at 11 o'clock here in the States. That's powerful, though. I would say the same thing, not that we're a business podcast, but if you take that same approach to life, again, you're going to have more setbacks. You can't always control everything in a startup and whatever you're doing beyond sports. But if you just take that same approach that you learned through sports to keep going, like a quick side tangent, I'm training. I still do a lot of basketball training, and the girl I was coaching yesterday, she had to make 5 shots in a row. Couldn't do it for 10, 15 minutes, but I probably said it 100 times. I was like, just keep going, you'll get there. Eventually she pushed through, and the smile on her face after finally getting it is awesome. And that's, if you can teach that through sports, that's why I think so many parents and athletes want to invest the time and resources in coaches like you and awesome people who can help them learn that, because then, you can be an awesome adult, you can do amazing things, but if you don't push past that, I don't know, you set a low ceiling, I think, for your life if you don't learn that at an early age. So.
Yep. Sport is a dress rehearsal for the real challenges that are ahead.
Yep. And I think the parents understand it that way and don't just focus on the wins and the trophies. Everyone will be a lot better off. But honestly, Beth, this has been incredible. I can't wait to share this. So many good tidbits and pieces of feedback to share. But again, thank you for your time, man. And again, we'll hopefully have you on again one day. Years down the line.
Thanks, Gene. Really appreciate it. Best of luck.